The wedding was originally planned for my older sister and Luke. However, my sister didn't want to marry him because she looked down on his seemingly impoverished background. She cried to our parents, so they forced me to marry Luke. Ever since I was little, I was despised and couldn't oppose my family's decision. Thus, I tearfully accepted my fate. But after we got married, I realized Luke wasn't as the rumors had painted. He was far from broke. Not only was Luke not destitute, but he also had huge wealth across the world that could rival a country's. The image he had portrayed before was only a test for my family. Later, my sister and parents regretted their decision and asked me to divorce Luke so that my sister could marry him. Luke pulled me into his arms and coldly said to my family, "Allison is my wife. She's the only one I will recognize in this lifetime. Since the day she got married to me, she no longer shares a relationship with your family." These were your own words. The wedding was originally planned for my older sister and Luke. However, my sister didn't want to marry him because she looked down on his seemingly impoverished background. She cried to our parents, so they forced me to marry Luke. Ever since I was little, I was despised and couldn't oppose my family's decision. Thus, I tearfully accepted my fate. But after we got married, I realized Luke wasn't as the rumors had painted. He was far from broke. Not only was Luke not destitute, but he also had huge wealth across the world that could rival a country's. The image he had portrayed before was only a test for my family. Later, my sister and parents regretted their decision and asked me to divorce Luke so that my sister could marry him. Luke pulled me into his arms and coldly said to my family, "Allison is my wife. She's the only one I will recognize in this lifetime. Since the day she got married to me, she no longer shares a relationship with your family." These were your own words. On my sister's 25th birthday, Luke came for a visit. His attire was modest, which made him appear somewhat constrained, but he carefully greeted my parents and sister. My father's brows furrowed, and he looked at Luke with a hint of impatience. Tessa and my mother's eyes clearly revealed a look of disdain and disgust. This was Luke's third visit to our home after returning to the country. Besides me, no one in my family thought highly of Luke. He handed a gift bag to Tessa and smiled softly. "Tessa, this is a gift I've carefully chosen for you." Before he could finish his sentence, Tessa disdainfully threw the gift bag at me. "A bracelet that costs a few $100s. How can you dare to give this?" "Give it to Allison. She seems to like these cheap things anyway." Without waiting for Luke's response, Tessa pulled my mom and headed upstairs. Tessa's words not only showed no respect for Luke, but also blatantly trampled on my dignity. Luke's face was pale. He glanced at me and forced a bitter smile. "If you don't like it, you can give it back to me." I felt sorry for him. I took out the bracelet from the gift bag, put it on my wrist, and whispered, "It's quite beautiful. Thank you, brother-in-law." My addressing him as brother-in-law angered my father, who was seated on the sofa. My father coldly huffed, glared at me, and said, "Your sister hasn't married him yet. What are you blindly calling him brother-in-law for?" After scolding me, my father impatiently said to Luke, "All right, if there is nothing else, you can leave now." Luke hastily responded, "Sir, it's been a month since I returned home. I would like to discuss about preparations for the wedding." Before Luke could finish speaking, my father abruptly smashed the teacup in his hand onto the ground. "What's the rush?" my father grumbled angrily. "Wait for the news at home rather than pestering us here like a ghost collector." Luke sighed, but he did not say anything more. When Luke had taken his leave, Tessa and our mother came downstairs. Tears streamed down her face as my sister pleaded with our father, "I won't marry him. I'd rather die than marry him." My mother also voiced her disapproval. With the Anderson family in its current state, how could Luke be a match for our Tessa? "I won't agree to this marriage." My father irately explained, "Many years ago, it was with the help of Luke's grandfather, our family achieved what we have today. Your grandfather made it clear before he passed away that our families must have a marriage alliance. This is what our family owes them. Many local businessmen know about this matter. If our family backs out and breaks off the engagement at this juncture, we will lose all of our dignity and have no face in the future." Growing increasingly anxious, my mother suggested, Give Luke a sum of money, let him take the initiative to cancel the marriage. My father, in helpless frustration, responded, That won't work. The boy doesn't want the money. He's after our family's property and contacts. I suspect that he's planning to marry into our family to secure his place. Both my parents vented their anger and frustration, saying that Luke was like a sticky patch covered with flies, annoyingly persistent and nauseating. To be honest, I think Luke is a decent person, but at this point it wasn't my place to speak. If I dared to say anything good about Luke at this time, my parents and Tessa would despise me even more. I was just about to go to my room and sleep when my sobbing sister suddenly spoke up. If Luke insists on marrying a girl from our family, why not Allison? My heart jolted and I looked at her in disbelief. Before I could speak, she wrapped herself around our father and wailed, Our families did have a prearranged marriage, but it does not necessarily mean I have to be the one to marry Luke. Letting Allison marry Luke is also okay. After all, I think Allison likes him. Hearing this, our parents were stunned momentarily. Then our mother was quick to say, Yes, indeed, this is a good solution. Father also nodded in agreement. They did not ask for my opinion at all. I began to cry, but they paid me no attention to me and even reprimanded me. Why are you crying? Luke is not bad looking. He's a good match for you. You're not like your sister. She holds a stake in the family business and has a high position in the company. Luke wants to marry her because he has his eyes on our company. Don't worry. After you marry Luke, we'll provide you with a generous inheritance. If you two manage your finances well, you'll be well provided for in your later years. We've settled this. I'll inform Luke later, and he won't have a say in the matter. Just like that, they did not give me a chance to resist, making a frivolous decision about my life. At that moment, I despised them. From the beginning, my family never liked me, mainly because after my parents had my older sister, they wanted to have a son. However, when I was born, my parents were greatly disappointed, and to make things worse, my mother almost lost her life due to severe bleeding on the day I was born. Hence, their dislike for me intensified even more. My older sister resented me as she felt that I was sharing what originally belonged to her. Since childhood, she was always against me. She pushed me down the stairs. Whenever something went wrong, she put the blame on me. That I grew up safe and sound was truly a blessing. My sister received her education from a prestigious school since childhood. My parents even paid a huge amount of money to send her to the most expensive business and finance management school. After graduation, she started working in our family's company. As for me, I went to an ordinary local school. After high school, my parents were unwilling to pay for my college education. I worked part-time and paid my way through college myself. After graduation, I found work based on my own abilities. Despite this, my family still criticized me. As I grew up, the stifling atmosphere of my family became increasingly unbearable for me. I had planned to talk to my parents about moving out and renting my own place after my sister's 25th birthday. But against my will, they had asked me to marry Luke in place of my sister. It was absurd and left me feeling utterly helpless. That night, I lay on my bed feeling heartbroken and somewhat disillusioned. From the living room outside came the laughter of my parents and sister while I quietly shed tears. I have always been a surplus in this family. Marrying Luke might be a good option after all, since I would be leaving this family. I just don't know if Luke will be angry or unsatisfied. If he really is like what my parents claim, scheming for our family's wealth, aiming to restore his family's company through our connections, then, once he finds out that I would be the bride, undoubtedly he will be disappointed. I thought a lot about it and prepared myself for the worst. At dawn, I took a deep breath and made a decision. Drafting a severance of parent-child relationship agreement, I knocked on my parents' bedroom door, placing the agreement in front of them. I will marry Luke, but on one condition. If you don't agree, I won't marry him. Sign this agreement. Once I marry Luke, I will have no ties with this family anymore. After seeing the contents of the agreement, my parents were first stunned, then erupted in rage. My father slammed his hand onto my face. He yelled, "I raised you since childhood. Now that you can fly, you're setting terms with us? If I had known you would be so ungrateful, I would have never given birth to you. My mother was also glaring at me angrily, speaking resentfully. Isn't it just to let you marry on behalf of your sister? It's not like we're asking you to die. Bringing you up, we've put so much effort. Why don't you have any gratitude? My face was red and swollen from my father's slap. The corner of my mouth had split, and the burning pain was unbearable. Listening to their words, I smiled bitterly and said, "Without asking for my opinion, you've already arranged my marriage. In your eyes, am I still considered your daughter? Since you're treating me like a commodity for trade, let's not talk about family affection then. This makes me feel somewhat disgusted." Dad was even more furious and wanted to hit me again. Mum hurriedly stopped him as Tessa quickly came over to placate him. "Dad, don't bother about Allison. She has been ungrateful since a young age. You know this. If she wants to sever ties with us, then let her be. It will stifle Luke's intentions of clinging on to our family." Tessa was eager to settle this matter once and for all. As long as her parents signed the hefty parent-child severance agreement, Allison would have taken care of both her and Luke's troubles. Naturally, she was pressing for this to happen. My parents were also filled with anger, and without a second word, they signed the agreement. With 2 copies of the agreement, my dad threw one of the signed copies onto me and said angrily, "In a few days, you'll hold the wedding with Luke, and I will publicly announce the severance of our relationship. I'd really like to see then, without the help of your family, how you are going to survive." Mom coldly said, "When you can't even afford meals with Luke, let's see if you will regret today's decisions." My elder sister, Tessa, continued to make sarcastic remarks on the side. "Allison, you've been spoiled rotten at home. You can't continue to throw your weight around outside. Not everyone will indulge you like family. If you can't get along with Luke, you can come back, and I'll plead on your behalf in front of our parents. After all, we are sisters. I can't bear to see you suffer." I was sick of listening to these disgusting and hypocritical words. I ignored them and went back to my room to pack. That evening, my parents called Luke to our house. Pointing at me, my father coldly said to Luke, "If you want to marry a daughter from our family, then she is the only one. Although our family and yours have a marriage contract, it does not specify which of my daughters is to marry you. If you agree, Allison can marry you in a few days. If you don't agree, it will be you who actively breaks off the engagement, and I will give you a sum of money. Let's not mention the matter of the marriage contract between the 2 families from now on." Luke looked distressed. His gaze turned to my elder sister, Tessa. Tessa gave Luke a look of disdain, speaking in a disgusted tone. "Don't look at me. There's no way I'm marrying you. I already have someone I love, Jack from the Lawrence Group. Have you heard of him? Compared to him, you're not even worthy of carrying his shoes." Luke sighed, nodding his approval to the marriage proposal with me. A hastily arranged wedding, a man and woman who have never spent time together, could be compared to a marriage made blindfolded. The man who was originally supposed to become my brother-in-law, Luke, was now getting married to me. The very thought of it seems utterly absurd. On the day of the wedding, the venue's decorations were very simple. Few families and friends from Luke's side attended. It was mostly relatives and friends from my side. My sister was smirking at me, and my parents had stern faces all the while. I, in an old wedding dress, and Luke, in a rented suit, completed our wedding under the bizarre gazes of the crowd. There were no congratulations. To me, Luke and I were just making fools of ourselves. Luke is broke and can't afford a wedding. The wedding was paid for by my family. In the end, my parents arranged such a meager wedding for me. They deliberately wanted to embarrass Luke and I. After the bleak wedding, my father walked onto the stage with a gloomy face. He should have said some words of blessing, but after grabbing the microphone, he announced in front of many relatives and friends that he was severing ties with me. From this day onwards, Allison is no longer a member of our family. She will have nothing to do with us in terms of birth, age, sickness, and death. After saying these words, disregarding everyone's astonished reactions, my parents walked away with Tessa. As she was leaving, she turned her head around to give Luke and I a smug, scornful smile. One by one, the guests left, and I burst into tears. I had always imagined what my wedding would be like: romantic, warm, luxurious. However, I had never expected my wedding day to end in such a way. As I was sobbing with heartache, Luke gently embraced me. "Honey, don't cry. It's not as terrible as you think. You have no family now, and neither do I. We are a perfect match, aren't we? Think of today's ceremony as a mere rehearsal. Soon, I'll give you the real wedding which will make all other women are green with envy." Through my blurred eyes and between my tears, I looked at him and sobbingly said, "Stop bragging already. Instead of making grand promises, start by figuring out where we're going to stay tonight." Today, I got married, but I don't have a single penny. My parents took away all my bank cards and cell phone. In their words, since I had cut all ties with them when I left home, I could not take anything from the house. Before the wedding, Tessa gave me $200 as if she were handing out alms. She scoffed insincerely. "Today is your big day, and your lovely sister has something good to give you. Take this money. Don't sleep on the street with Luke tonight. At least you can afford a hotel room for the night." In response to her humiliation, I felt both angry and deeply helpless. What am I supposed to do in the days to come? I can't count on Luke. He had returned to the country for a month. It was said that he slept on a park bench at night and lived hand to mouth doing odd jobs during the day. I thought of how we could get a job at a factory so we could provide for ourselves. However, while I was considering our future livelihood, Luke took me away from the shabby wedding hall. A limousine was parked by the side of the road. The driver hurriedly opened the door respectfully when he saw me and Luke coming. With my confused face, Luke pulled me into the car. I looked at him blankly. My mind was blank, not knowing what to say. He held my hand and said with a smile, "Wife, there is a lot to explain. Wait until I finish dealing with some things, then I'll explain in detail to you. You'll be staying in the Maple Manor for the next few days. As I promised, I will give you a wedding ceremony with all eyes on us. I swear I won't go back on my word." After he finished speaking, he gave me a little kiss on my cheek, drew me into his arms, and whispered softly, "For you, I've been pretending for an entire month. You can't imagine how difficult it has been for me, especially sleeping on the park bench at night with so many mosquitoes they could practically carry me away. This past month, spending days handing out flyers on the street, washing dishes in restaurants until my back was about to break. It was exhausting. But now, having you here with me, it was all worth it." Maple Manor was the most expensive property around here. There were rumors that it was bought by a mysterious tycoon, but no one knew who the real owner was. When I walked in, I was welcomed by many servants, leaving me stunned and in a daze. Wasn't Luke's family bankrupt? How did he miraculously become the owner of Maple Manor? The value of Maple Manor could easily rival the wealth of my family. All this just left me in a state of shock, like being in a dream. I asked the servants in the manor about Luke, but they were uncertain about his situation. Only the old housekeeper smiled and said to me, "Madam, the master had previously ordered to give you a big surprise. If you have any questions, you will understand on the day of your wedding. If I reveal it to you now, the surprise will be ruined. Since he was young, Mr. Anderson was determined that you were the only woman meant to be his wife." The words of the old butler left me even more bewildered. What on earth was Luke up to? Has he really been thinking of me as his wife since we were kids? What a joke. He had only returned to the country a month ago, and it seemed that was the first time we met. I stopped trying to puzzle over situations I didn't understand. Over the following few days, I got a taste of what it truly means to live the life of a wealthy madam. Having others at my beck and call, surrounded by people whenever I stepped out, made me uncomfortable for a while, but I got used to it. In the blink of an eye, 5 days flew by. The old butler delivered to me a top-quality, custom-made wedding dress along with some jewelry. He said, "These were specially made for you by Mr. Anderson. The wedding dress was hand-stitched by a famous tailor, and it has 999 diamonds on it. Even money can't buy this kind of wedding dress. This ruby necklace was for which he had paid a hefty sum at an auction a few years ago, just so it could match you. And these emerald earrings also have quite a history. Whether it was the wedding dress or these pieces of jewelry, all of it left me dumbstruck. Just these items alone would probably cost more than everything my family could afford. If this is a dream, I wish to wake up a little bit later. The wedding reception was held at the Maple Manor. When the evening fell, the outside of Maple Manor was littered with luxury cars. Almost all of the renowned local elites brought along their wives. I also saw my parents and sister. They were dressed up, with a man accompanying Tessa. It was her beloved Jack Fack, the young CEO of the Lawrence Group. I stood by the window on the second floor of the villa, watching my parents and sister laughing and chatting with business elites, feeling somewhat strange inside. I wonder what their expressions would be if they knew I was the star of tonight's event. For a moment, I couldn't help but look forward to it. Just then, someone gently hugged me from behind. It was Luke. He seemed a little tired and lazily said to me, "Wifey, you have no idea how busy these few days have been for me. In preparation for this wedding, I have made several trips abroad and have also contacted some of the old fellows from the local Chamber of Commerce to invite so many people through them. After the wedding, you have to reward me well. Let's go. Don't stay here. Let's go out and let them see the lady of the Maple Manor." Inside, I felt a little nervous, especially when Luke and I appeared in front of everyone. My parents and my sister widened their eyes and looked at me incredulously, which made my heart beat faster. Luke gently held my hand, leading me to the prepared wedding banquet table. Many people in the audience had strange expressions, all subconsciously looking towards my parents and sister. Not long ago, the news about my simple wedding and my parents cutting ties with me caused quite a stir in our local business community. At the sight of Luke and me, dressed up and walking onto the wedding banquet stage, naturally, quite a few people gasped in surprise. The old butler, with a beaming smile, held the microphone as the master of ceremonies and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the wedding of Mr. Anderson. As some of you may know, our young master and his wife have already held a simple wedding before. However, that was organized by the Bell family, and the young master was worried that the bride might feel worried, so he decided to do a grand wedding for his wife. The Maple Manor was purchased by our young master some years ago, especially to be a wedding gift for the young lady. In addition to that, the young master has a few jewelry shops abroad, all of which have been transferred under his wife's name." These statements from the old butler led to jealous and envious looks from the crowd. Many of them looked at my parents and sister with mocking and gloating gazes. My parents wore uncomfortable expressions, and Tessa was almost driven mad with jealousy. After the old butler conducted our wedding procedures, Luke and I stood up to raise a toast. When we got to the table where my parents were seated, Luke smiled at them and said, "Uncle, Auntie, thank you for taking such good care of Allison over the years. It means a lot to us that you're here today." My heart raced as I watched their reactions. My parents, who had once distanced themselves from me, now looked conflicted, caught between their pride and the reality of my new life. Tessa, unable to hide her jealousy, forced a smile, but I could see the tension in her eyes. As we raised our glasses, I felt a mix of triumph and anxiety. This was not just a wedding, it was a declaration. A chance to show everyone, including my family, that I had found my place, and it was far from what they had envisioned for me. The clinking of glasses echoed in the grand hall, and I could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, a mixture of admiration and envy swirling around us. With every toast, every smile exchanged, I embraced the moment. This was my time, and I was ready to step into the spotlight, no longer just the daughter of my parents, but the lady of the Maple Manor, defining my own path. I was hoping to express my gratitude to you after our wedding, and I had even prepared a large sum of money to invest in your company. Who would have thought that you would choose to sever ties with Allison? It's such a pity. I'm not much for talking either. We don't mind. My dad was shaking with anger, and my mom was on the verge of losing her temper on the spot. Tessa couldn't hold back anymore and snorted, "What is there to be smug about? Isn't it just some dirty money? You, Luke, pretended to be poor and destitute while visiting my home before. We didn't despise you, but even married my little sister to you. If you don't appreciate it, it's one thing, but you deliberately scoff and belittle us. Had we known you and Allison were here, we wouldn't even bother coming. Who cares about your dirty money? Without your investment, do you think our family would starve? Who is looking down on whom? And with that, she hooked her arms with the man beside her and spoke to Luke with a haughty face. My boyfriend Jack. Do you know him? The young master of the Lawrence Group. With his help, it's more than enough for our family. As soon as her words fell, Luke grinned and directed his question at Jack. The Bell family finances are a little tight recently. How much are you planning to invest to help them tide over the difficulty? Jack shrugged, laughing in reply. $200, that should be enough, right? With that, he and Luke burst into laughter. Such a scene left my parents and Tessa dumbfounded. In a ball of fury, she began to cross-examine Jack. Jack casually brushed my sister off, taunting her. Tessa, I indeed am the CEO of Lawrence Group, but guess what? The largest shareholder of Lawrence Group is Mr. Anderson. My family only happens to be managing Lawrence Group on his behalf. As Jack's words left his lips, they left everyone present shocked. I couldn't help but turn my gaze towards Luke, who was standing beside me. Just how much money did this man have? Not just in my heart, this question must be circulating among the guests present. At this wedding, Luke indeed gave me a massive surprise, almost scaring me. However, the better he treated me, the less secure I felt in my heart. What about me attracted him? Confusion and anxiety filled my heart. As the wedding banquet came to an end, guests dispersed. The events that occurred tonight at Maple Manor would undoubtedly make the headlines in the local news tomorrow morning. Just as Luke was wrapping his arm around me, preparing to head back to the room, the old butler approached us. Sir, the members of the Bell family would like to see the young mistress. Luke waved his hand and said, Have them wait a bit. Luke led me back to our room to change. Gently he asked, Do you want to meet them? If not, you can stay upstairs and rest while I handle it. I shook my head and replied, I want to see what they're up to. After changing my clothes, I didn't wait for Luke but went downstairs to find my parents and sister. After tonight's blow, my parents and Tessa all looked a bit haggard and dispirited. Seeing me, Tessa's eyes filled with jealousy and resentment. She gritted her teeth and said, Allison, I didn't expect you to be so calculating. You knew all along that Luke was faking his bankruptcy, didn't you? You pretend to be innocent, just wanting to snatch him from me, right? You've been like this since you were a kid, always scheming, not even sparing your own family. You're truly heartless. My mother also angrily accused me, saying, We raised you since you were a child, but this is how you chose to repay us. You've betrayed our family without any conscience. If you want us to forgive you, the only way is for you to break up with Luke right now, divorce him and let your sister marry him. I almost laughed in disbelief. Does this mother and daughter duo take me for a fool? They were the ones who forced me to marry Luke. They were the ones who didn't like me, and now they're blaming everything on me. Who was the shameless one here? Before I could speak, my father impatiently said, Go tell Luke now, ask him to marry Tessa. Come back home with us now. We will give you a share of the company's equity in the future. Consider this as your compensation. What are you looking at? Hurry up and call Luke down. Taking a deep breath, I responded, I really don't know how you have the nerve to say such things. I have nothing more to do with you guys. Now please leave my house immediately. My parents and sister were suddenly enraged. They seemed to think I was still like before, under their control as if they could coerce me into submission. At this moment, Luke came down from upstairs. What are you guys trying to do? Don't you ever raise your voices at my wife in my house. Do you know I can have you carried out horizontally just as you entered vertically? As soon as Luke's words fell, the butler led in over a dozen robust security guards from the Maple Manor, their menacing gaze fixed on my parents and sister. My mom and Tessa turned pale and dared not utter a word. My dad, however, put on a stoic face and confronted Luke, saying, It is perfectly normal for a father to discipline his daughter. What's it to you? Luke snorted coldly, held me in his arms, and said, Allison is my wife, and my only one. If I remember correctly, you guys have already cut off all ties with my wife, so you no longer have the right to reprimand her. I'm showing you some respect here. Don't push it. Get out, or I'll have you carried out. When my parents and Tessa left Maple Manor, they were ashen-faced. Tessa had even lost control of her emotions and started to hurl abusive language furiously. She was green with envy. My parents, too, were vehemently cursing myself and Luke. Luke didn't bother to argue with them. Instead, he made a phone call directly, ordering a strike on the Bell Group. That evening, Luke told me things about himself. The marriage agreement between our families means nothing to me. Had it not been for you, I would have never pretended to be a poor young man visiting your house and displaying a desire to rise again with the help of your family's financial connections, he said. Both your parents are snobs and your sister is conceited and indifferent. How could they ever let me marry your sister smoothly? My intention from the very beginning was to marry you. For this, I even instructed Jack to advise your sister to actively request your parents' approval for your hand in marriage. Hearing these things, I looked at him strangely and asked, "Is it worth all the scheming you've gone through just to marry me?" "I don't understand why you're so infatuated with me. What's so good about me?" Luke held me in his arms, gently smiled, and said, "Wife, have you forgotten? We met many years ago, probably the year when you were 9, by the roadside where you saved a little boy. Do you recall?" As he spoke, I faintly remembered the incident. Suddenly, my eyes widened in shock as I blurted out, "You were that little boy with a heart condition?" When I was 9 years old, I unintentionally saved a little boy who was having a heart attack. At that time, the boy was curled up on the ground, convulsing in pain. He had medicine with him, but he didn't have the strength to open it. I was the one who helped him open the bottle cap, poured out the pills, and fed them to him. Unexpectedly, Luke turned out to be that little boy. When I wanted to ask him again, he pushed me down on the bed, laughing cheekily, "Wife, we can talk about it in bed." 1 month after our marriage, my family went bankrupt, causing my parents and Tessa to suffer immensely. The Bell Company's capital chain was broken. No one dared to help them. Furthermore, Luke targeted their assets, and within less than a month, the company was almost non-existent. In the end, my desperate parents and Tessa sold all their assets, but even so, they still couldn't pay off the debts. They were forced by the creditors to flee overnight. Not long after, someone captured a video of my parents selling goods at a night market in another city. Their lives were tough, and Tessa, she completely snapped under the pressure, always laughing foolishly at anyone she met, incessantly claiming she was a wealthy lady. Luke had already helped my parents clear the debts, but he did not tell them. They were still living in constant fear that the creditors would find them. Luke said, "Everyone must pay for their own mistakes. The punishment for them is about enough. Whether to forgive them or not is up to you. If you want to take them back, I can have my people handle it right away." I shook my head. "Not causing them any more trouble is my last act of kindness. I'm very grateful to the heavens for letting me meet Luke. If it weren't for him, I might still be sinking in a sea of suffering. Dad, Mom, Tessa, may we never meet again in this lifetime."